play chess with ChessRabbitt.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show. What you're about to see is a game that I played against a 1700 rated player called Rusty. Um, I don't know if this is played on chess.com or whatever. Anyway, let's get on with the game. Uh, it's a pretty good game. We played both fairly decently. I will try to point out some mistakes. This game I did analyze with a computer, but I'm going to go through it here, and we're just going to see what kind of plans I had when I was playing the game. If I can remember, it's been a little bit since I played this game, but we'll try to remember the plans. If not, I just make them up as I play along now. So why not? What the hey? I don't have anything else better to do. Well, I do, but I'm not going to do it. Okay, here we go. D4, D5. As you know, I'm a 1D4 player, and the reason why I play that move is because while I'm trying to emulate, well, I play 1E4, but in the beginning of my chess career, when I first learned how to play chess, there's just a lot of theory you have to know about e4. I mean, you have the Sicilian defense, which has a whole branch of theory I really didn't really want to get into. You have the Ruy Lopez, the Jogo Piano, which has a lot of theory to it. There's just a lot of theory, but it is a good opening for beginners to play 1e4, but it didn't really suit my style. I One of my favorite chess players is Anatoly Karpov, the 12th world champion, and after he started playing Gary Kasparov in the 84-85 match, he switched from e4 to d4, and I didn't know that at the time because I didn't start playing chess till 91, right after their last championship battle between Karpov and Kasparov in 1990, and well, Kasparov and Karpov, since Kasparov was the world champion, and I followed his games, and he opened with d4, and that's how I became a d4 player. So I pretty much try to emulate one of my favorite chess players of Anatoly Karpov. c4, c6, knight c3, knight f3, and knight f3. I mean knight f6 and knight f3. Here I could have went e6. I mean e3, and then followed by my opponent e6 playing a semi-Slav here. Knight f3. He takes e4, a4, of course. You don't want your opponent to move to b5 right away. So if your opponent moves to b5, you can take with the a pawn and then take and then knight take. Bishop f5, bishop g5, getting my bishop outside this pawn chain, because once I move this pawn to e3, once I get this pawn to e3, then this bishop that's on c1 would no longer be able to get on this side of the pawn chain. So I decided to do that first. Queen b6, c1, h6, putting the question to my bishop. Um, Depending on how I play, I would probably say 70% of the time I move the bishop out of the way to h4 to bring it on this diagonal here. But the other 30% of the time, I don't know, maybe it's more like 50-50 instead of 70-30. But this time I decide to take. Now the reason I decide to take here is because, as you can see, I am doubling my opponent's pawns. And I like doubling my opponent's pawns because he has a little bit of a weaker structure when you double your opponent's pawns, as opposed to, say, if this pawn wasn't here and you can take back with the knight, I probably would do the maneuver bishop h4, then bishop g3, and keep it on this diagonal here. But since the only piece I can recapture is a pawn at this point, do that to double my opponent's pawns. So there you go. F takes G. I mean G takes F6. E3. Preparing to go after this pawn on C4. Bishop G7. Takes. Queen D8. Alright, castle. Getting my little king to safety. Bishop G4. Attacking this knight. Now there is no queen here for a pin, so I can move the knight. But in this game, I decided to keep the knight on board and move the bishop back. A5, rook E1, just in case I want to move this knight to another square, it would be protected. I would rather have it be protected by this rook here than to take back with this knight. So that's why I moved the rook here. Queen D7, and Blackley should conclude his development a little quickly. This knight over here is saying, "Hey, play me, play me, play me," and he's moving queens. And this is like the third or fourth time he moved his queen already, so that's not a real good sign. H3. Okay, bishop. What do you want to do? You want to stay there? You want to move back? In other words, put in the question to the bishop. But I decided to actually produce the questions. Other people's questions. Anyway, bishop takes f3. Bishop takes f3. Now my bishop is on this great long diagonal. You know, that's where you want this light square bishop is on this diagonal. You want your dark square bishop, as my opponent, on this diagonal. But I have a lot more scope on this diagonal than my opponent does on his diagonal. But that's just for now. Things will change later on in the game. Maybe my opponent should have moved f5 here. And that way you're releasing the bishop. And maybe you can start attacking this pawn with, this bishop, and then maybe later going to c5, to attack this d4 point here. But my opponent didn't do that. He went b6, knight e4, bishop d7, b7, knight d2, remaneuvering the knight. I want to remaneuver the knight from here to this square to here. Not there. To here to attack this pawn. So that's what this maneuver was. That's why I started this maneuver. f5, knight c4, and now I'm attacking the pawn, as I said. Bishop f6, knight e5 to attack this pawn, the c6 pawn. Bishop takes e5, d takes e5, queen c7, getting ready to attack the e5 pawn. Queen c3, protecting the e5 pawn. e6, making sure that this e5 pawn doesn't maneuver the knight from the b8 square to d7 to help attack the pawn on e5. Rook c1. Now what I'm planning on doing, but my opponent's plan is to, of course, attack this pawn on e5, and my plan is to attack this pawn on c6. So if my opponent happens to move his knight here, my queen could come and take, and it is being backed up by this rook on c1. So I would win a pawn. Of course, I probably wouldn't win a pawn for long, because after the exchanges here, then this knight would just pick up this pawn, and then it would be looking at my bishop where my pawns will possibly be doubled. Rook a6. At this point, maybe my opponent should have castled here. Then I would go rook de1. Rook e d1. That way I would have the open d file. Because right now the rook on this file is not really doing anything. It's running into the e3 pawn. So you got to get the rook on open file. Rooks love open files. Let's go back. Bishop takes c6, opening the e file. That way I get lots of play. Queen takes c6, check. Queen takes c6, rook takes c6, and I win a pawn. I win a pawn, and I have my opponent's pawns are doubled over here, so I'm looking pretty good at this point. My opponent castles e1, doubling the rooks on this file, which is always a good thing. Rook A8, and I take the E pawn, and we'll take it. Rook F8. I don't know why my opponent played this move on Rook C7. B7, pigs on the 7th rank, and now F7 here is looking a little loose and tired. Rook EB8. I decide to exchange. Probably I could have went here. This may seem like a better move to take this pawn and then Rook B7 and Rook B7 and Rook C8, where this rook could come down, check my opponent, check my king, and I would have to move my king to this square, and then probably move my king to G3 to protect the F2 pawn. I decided to take Rook C2, keep an eye on the B2 pawn. Probably here I could have went, instead of going all the way down to C2, I probably could have went Rook A7, then take, and now this pawn is protected by this rook. But it's not really good to have your rook in front of a passed pawn, but in this case it may be good because I am a couple of pawns up. So Rook C2, King H7. Maybe my opponent in here, instead of going King H7, should have went H4 to prevent this pawn from moving to either G3 or G4. King F1, Rook B4, Rook C7, attacking the F7 pawn. King G7, Rook A7, Rook takes A4, B3, Rook A1, check, Rook C1. Maybe my opponent should have went Rook B1 to attack this pawn, and of course at this point, after the exchanges here, I would be one pawn up. I'm a pawn up, but I have double pawns. As my opponent has double pawns, and this structure is all locked up, and it probably would have been a drawn game from there. C1, Rook takes A5. The passed pawn on B3 will quickly become a dangerous weapon. This pawn here, there's nothing that can stop it. And once you get your rook behind a passed pawn, it's really curtains. Rook C7, Rook A1, preparing to put my rook behind the passed pawn and push it up the board. King H6, Rook B1, King G7. Now, if you have noticed, there has been a couple of moves that my opponent could have made to stop this. He wasted a couple of tempies maneuvering his king around. Probably he wants to get his king on this diagonal, then put it outside this pawn chain. Well, he can't go to that. He can't go to that square. He has to move past that square. But probably move here, here, and here, and try to help the king and the rook out to grab this passed pawn here. That probably was his idea. H4, Rook C3, G3, F6. Pretty much running out of tempi, so he has to start maneuvering pawns. E takes F6 check, King takes F6, B4, C7, B5, pushing the old pawn up. Rook B7, B6, King E5, Rook B5 check, King D6, King F4, maneuver my king, getting my king into the action. Rook C6, back to Rook B1. I don't play these end games real well, but my opponent, being a 1700 rated player, is pretty much giving me a lot of play here. And actually, I'm not doing too bad here. And I have this great passed pawn here, which is probably about to be gone here in a minute. King B6, King D6, King G5, C5. Here my opponent probably could have went King E7. Then I would have moved my pawn to F3 and probably had some good compensation there. put some more pressure on my opponent's pawns. King h5, another rook up. d8, g5, queen g8 check, king f4, e5 check. Now I take. Now I'm, what, 3 pawns up at this point. So I have a pass pawn on the h file. I have a pass pawn on the g file here. Rook f8 check. Now all of my pawns are passed. At this point, my opponent could have resigned, but I guess they're a glutton for punishment, so let's punish him. Rook e8 check, king f4, rook f8 check, king g4. Now I don't know why my opponent didn't play this move, because once you play here, well, this pawn here is pretty much gonna go. Well, let's not move the king. Let's say we move this back. See, you move the rook back, you queen, rook takes, and too much firepower over here for the king to, muster. So he could have resigned at that point. So that's why my opponent didn't take on the f2 square. Rook g8 check, king f3, rook f8, king e2. Now my king is secure from all checks. I can begin to move these pawns up, put my king behind the pawns, move this pawn up. So pretty much my opponent could have resigned it, but he didn't. And pretty much what I'm going to do is just go through the rest of the moves. As you can see, just start going through some of these moves. Make sure my king is protecting all these pawns. And the rest is, well, I probably had other winning plays where I could have done it a lot faster. Here I could have went 2 ways. I could have queened this pawn right away. Here you queen. Right? Queen takes, and that would have been checkmate. But I didn't do that. Instead, I went for the long mate, the fork here. And that's why I have to brush up on my endgames, because I had a mate in 3 there and I didn't see it. I missed the mate in 3. But anyway, this is all academic here. Just march the king over to the side of the board and boom. A couple of other moves could have won here. Also, queen a5 would have won. So that's the game against Rusty, rated 1748. Thank you very much. This is ChessRabbitt, and hopefully we play some more games. Until then, ChessRabbitt out. Bye bye.
ChessRabbitt was here.